we are back, and now we go to Ron Price, who writes under the name of Unanimous. So we've gone from anonymous to... No, I'm just kidding there. Let's see. Ron Price hails originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and is now here in New York, and has done a lot of interesting things in his time. Let's see. You were a poet in the parks.
A poet in parks, you know, the artist in education program. Poets in the parks, poets in prisons, poets in the schools.
Oh, I see. Which did you like best?
The parks. They were very young.
That's good.
Easy to deal with in comparison to people in prisons.
What was a better audience in the park, the people or the trees?
No debate.
All right, let's see. You've been in a large number of magazines. Let's see: the American Poetry Review, New Letters, Northeast Corridor, Ratapalax, otherwise known as the Anonymous Review. No, sorry, George. And Southern Exposure.
Yeah.
Let's see. You were featured in the Painted Bride Quarterly. What does it take to become a magazine feature?
I have no idea.
How much space did they give you?
16 pages, 17 pages, something like that.
Good grief.
Yeah, it was nice. They did a good job.
Bio?
Photo and bio, an introduction from somebody else.
900 number?
Well, they weren't giving that out.
Oh, well, yeah. And you do translations.
Yeah.
If you're doing it from the French, I gather that you speak it.
I speak restaurant French, but I work with people who are but I work with people who are fluent in the language that I'm translating out of, and then try to bring something over into American English.
Let's see, Rene Char.
Char. What about him?
Okay, now I don't have to ask, is it a he or a she? What did you translate?
So far about 30 poems. I'm working off of a collected volume of his work.
Okay. The German of Rainer Marie Rilke.
The Orpheus Sonnets, primarily, some of the new poems.
Many people don't remember this, but Rilke ran against Roosevelt in 1940. And the Greek of George Seferis?
Seferis, yes. Seferis was just a little bit younger than Cavafy, same.
And the Hidden Castle, played from the Norwegian of John Lockhart.
Right.
Good Norwegian name, I guess. Let's see, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts Fellowship. There's a lot of stuff here. I gotta compliment you on that. Do they pay well in Pennsylvania?
It's not New York.
Yes, but what is?
Yeah, California.
Let's see, and your own books are Surviving Brothers and A Crucible for the Left Hand. And you teach Juilliard.
Yes.
What do you teach?
Literature courses, writing courses.
I didn't realize they had that. I thought it was all music.
No, they have music, dance, and drama. All three sections are all fairly well known. The liberal arts department, which is where I teach from, is not especially well known. But yeah, it's been around for a while.
And you're the poet in residence at the Juilliard School.
Right.
How long have you had?
Well, 4 or 5 years now. They call it poet in residence. You could also call it token poet.
Oh,
one of those. One of those. No, I don't have to sweep floors.
Good for you.
I just have to blow out the inside of piano sometimes.
Please, this is a family show. You gotta watch this guy. Anyway, how about giving everybody a sample of what made you the poet in residence at Juilliard?
All right. Well, I'll do it a different way, because I don't know if they would claim this or not. But Richard was talking about Vietnam, and it occurred to me how many ways that word just shoots across so many borders for an enormous number of people, somewhere between 45 and 55 or 60. So I thought I'd start off with a poem that I have about that time. It's called The Gift. Moonlight spilled through the sour leaves of the persimmon tree next to my father's house. I sat alone on the roof 2 hours before dawn. Boys I'd known, a few years older, had already come home in body bags. And now I had to choose Canada, maybe Sweden, or jail. A resistance advisor said to hold strong with my brothers who burned their draft cards and mailed the ashes to the Pentagon. I wasn't so sure. What remained unspoken felt close to the distance and death. It hung in the air like the scent of a rotten egg. Canada, maybe Sweden, or jail. They were all one choice, all exile. A car drove by. There was laughter. Somebody shrieked, "Jesus Christ!" Somebody tossed a bottle out the car window, and something in me broke like glass shattering against a curb. I lay down on the roof, flooded with moonlight, and the moon accepted my faithless tears, the only gift I had worthy to give. Offer, I guess, might be the idiom. I was learning how people like things get broken without yet having learned that things get built again, and those who build them again know true joy.
That is very moving stuff. Did you happen to write a lot about Vietnam?
Well, I guess I've written a few poems about Vietnam, but not so much about the experience of being in Vietnam as the way Vietnam happened in America.
Yeah.
I was very lucky right at the point where I was going to have to make a choice. The last lottery came along, and my number was so low that it became a non-issue. But I knew way too many people who talked about, oh, I wouldn't go, and go and did come back in body bags. So I had a personal relationship with it, even though I didn't end up there.
As so many did. What other subjects inspire you?
Well, actually, it was a little misleading the way that I gave you that bio note, because I was born in Wisconsin, but I only lived there for about 6 weeks. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta. So I'll give you a poem that sort of goes back to that place. This is called Driving Away from Nothing. That morning, I got in the car and drove to the interstate, headed south into the Mississippi. Sorry, I'll just start this again. That morning, I got into the car and drove to the interstate, headed south into Mississippi, where I unloaded trucks with a forklift 48 hours a week, making enough money to house and feed my wife and our unborn child so I could go on unloading trucks, boxes of streetlight fixtures that lit my father's way as he drove at 3 in the morning from a job that paid enough to house and feed his wife and the 2 sons who still lived with them, my brothers. I thought of my father when I was 13, a late night somewhere before dawn. I rose from bed, sleepwalking the architectural warp of a dream, and entered the kitchen looking for a toilet. My father sat at the table staring into an empty glass, the dark pressing night moths against the window. I walked to the refrigerator, opened the door, and started to unbutton my pajamas when my father's hand took my hand, turning me back toward the hallway. "You don't want to be here," he said. I looked up at him. As I walked into the dark, there were tears in his eyes. I drove out of that memory and past the exit to the light factory, past Lynchburg and Hernando, Senatobia, Long Branch Dam, Tillatoba, drove and kept driving through Roseland and Ponchatoula into New Orleans, the French Quarter, a dump off the old line known as Desire, where I sat on a bar stool staring into a glass of bourbon, drinking enough to stay sober against the knowledge it might take a few weeks to replace me at work, maybe a few months for my wife to get on, but child, oh child, blood of my blood.
How long did you spend in Louisiana?
I lived there right after I got out of school for 6 months. I mostly lived outside of Memphis, between Memphis and Mississippi.
When I heard Mississippi Delta, I think.
Yeah. Well, the Mississippi Delta actually starts arguably on the back steps of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis, and if you're flying over it, you can actually see the terrain start to turn into Delta right in Memphis. So
fascinating.
yeah. And if you look I mean, if you're flying if you're in an airplane, you can see, and you see the landscape that way. You can really see the difference in the Midwest starting on the other side of the river at Memphis, also.
Any interesting times in Memphis?
A few, yeah. You got something specific in mind?
Something with a poem in it.
Yeah, I can give you a poem with some. There's this woman. She came up out of Mississippi, and her name was Ma Rainey II. And when she was a young girl, she spent all of her time singing in churches, and she knew she had to get out of there, but she wasn't really sure where she was going. So the natural pattern for people especially for blacks from Mississippi, was to end up going to Indianapolis or Chicago or Detroit. I have to find this poem. Take a second, but this goes on for a second. Also,
and what happened to her?
Well, she met Ma Rainey in Detroit and in Chicago, and she had such an amazing voice, and she fashioned it after Rainey's voice, and so she ended up being dubbed Ma Rainey II. And then she came back to sing in Memphis, and there was a place in Memphis called Blues Alley. I used to spend a lot of time there, and one night there was this interesting conversation, this amazing conversation going on with her and a woman named Little Laura Dukes and Memphis Slim. And at one point I realized I was going to screw things up if I started writing down what I was hearing, so I was running into the bathroom and scribbling stuff down, and then coming back out and sitting down and listening, and then running back into the bathroom. So the shortcomings of this poem are mine, but what works in it is what she said. This is called Singing the Blues. The thing about the blues for a singer, she uses her voice like a horn. Most singers, they put everything into the initial attack, and from there fade away, but not a horn. A horn swells. It's more in the middle, sometimes near the end. The man with the sax stands sideways to the light. He blows loud and full, his face dark in its music. You've just got to close your eyes and keep singing. I look out at a group of people dancing a rambunctious number, and half the crowd is a half step off. You wonder how they keep on dancing. If you watch too close, you try to get with them, and you lose the ones you had, and never can keep up with those others anyway. So I can give you another one if you want, or we
By all
can.
means.
Okay.
A small one.
There wasn't a lot to do in Memphis. So one of the things that we used to do for a really small one, I can give you a really small one.
Okay.
I'll give you something different.
Okay.
This is really small. This is called Winter Blues. Weighing down the mountain laurel, sudden snow and the fire rootless things require.
That was small.
That was small.
The great thing about you, Ron, and you, Richard, is that you could really get lost in a show like this and just feel the words take you where you're supposed to be going with them. And I want to thank you both for coming on, Richard Levine and Ron Price.
Thanks.
And thanks to Annette at Planet One here for letting us in. And before we go, do either of you have any unfulfilled ambitions in your writing?
Yeah.
Well, don't all answer at once.
Well, I am after a public domain as my next diploma.
Yeah.
That sounds good. That sounds like a good place to stop.
Until next time, for Poet to Poet, I'm Robert Dunn, and thanks for watching.